If your goal is to blend in, play it safe, and play not to lose, then I guess staying on message is totally fine. The flip side of that is it can be pretty forgettable.
Most leaders are very good at being on message, and yet their communication gets ignored. Because in today's environment, being on message is not the same as being memorable.
If you take factual information and you embed it within storytelling, it becomes 22 times more memorable.
In this episode, we're going to show you how to move beyond just being clear and becoming impossible to ignore. You learn how to structure your message so that people actually remember it and act on it, and the specific techniques top communicators use, from how they open to how they use their voice to how they keep attention in the moments that matter most. I'm Oliver Aust. I've helped over 300 CEOs and founders become top 1% communicators, and this is Speak Like a CEO, where I help you master communications as a leader. And today I'm joined by Bill McGowan, the author of Speak Memorably, who has coached some of the world's top executives on exactly this skill. Leaders think a lot about staying on message, but is that really the right focus today?
Well, if your goal is to blend in and play it safe and play not to lose, then I guess staying on message is totally fine. But the flip side of that is it can be pretty forgettable. The old expression, it's hard to stand out if you're intent on blending in. So our focus, and the focus in the book, is really about putting a premium on being memorable instead of just being messaged. And if your goal of speaking is to inspire, to motivate, to encourage people, to inform them, then being on message really isn't enough today.
Yeah, because the brain doesn't pay attention to boring things,
sure
right?
I understand.
It doesn't. It totally locks into storytelling. It locks into specific visual things. The visual side of our brain is so powerful, and it's as if there's this movie reel spinning in our head at all times. And if you, as the speaker in front of an audience, do not dictate what images are spooling through that movie projector in the minds of your audience, then your audience will manufacture their own images. And that's typically what we call daydreaming. So it's very important to stimulate that side of the listener's mind. And that's one of the great ways to keep them engaged.
So how do we get our audience's attention? I'm thinking particularly about leaders who need to get the attention of their internal and external audiences.
It's about figuring out what anecdotal material you have that will connect to the audience and help them understand things in a very real human way. We're storytellers from the very beginning of mankind. And there's an interesting stat that I found in researching for Speak Memorably, and that was that if you take factual information and you embed it within storytelling, it becomes 22 times more memorable to your audience than fire hosing just facts and figures at them.
And then you start ideally with the story, right? Because you don't have a lot of time to capture attention. So why not start with the most interesting part and then move over to, let's say, from storytelling to fact-telling mode?
Mm-hmm. I typically advise people to figure out a story they could lead with that is metaphorically connected to the idea that they want to stress in their talk. And keep the story moving. It shouldn't be much longer than a minute. And then what's very important is to really structure what I call a through line. That's the line that helps the audience understand what is the connection between this seemingly random story that you may have started with and the crux of what you're there to talk about. So opening story, through line, and then that gets you into your presentation.
But then often, even if leaders do this, it often becomes this, the next 44 minutes are pretty dull. So how do we keep them on board and bought into the idea that I'm trying to convey?
You should make sure that the balance in how you communicate stylistically has an equilibrium to it. And if you think about there being two styles of communicating, there's abstract and theoretical, and then there's specific, visual, and anecdotal. And in my experience, when I work with people, I find that that balance is completely out of whack. The abstract and the theoretical is much more heavily weighted. And maybe occasionally they'll tell something that fits into the other category. So those two things have to be very much in balance. If it gets out of whack, you're going to lose your audience. Again, it's about stimulating that visual side of the brain every minute, every 90 seconds. Help them understand something by helping them visualize something. There's also something called the theory of loci, which is placing things visually for people, putting an idea in perhaps a box here or a box over there. Anytime you can create a setting for your ideas, that also helps with engagement and retention.
What formats capture the audience's attention?
Well, it's funny, when I was a producer for network television in the United States, long form stories were 10, 11, 12 minutes. Now it seems like long form is 3 minutes. And it's very hard for executives to exercise brevity. I think there's this belief that you have to include everything. Oh, I can't leave that out. That has to be in there. And I find that videos that maybe you record for your internal workforce, or maybe you're posting something to LinkedIn, videos really should not be longer than a minute. In fact, I'm doing a project right now with Angela Duckworth at Wharton in Pennsylvania. We're working with her students on your 60-second life story. And I find that one of the biggest obstacles for people when they go to be interviewed for a job, the easiest question is also the hardest question. So tell me about yourself. And in my experience, people fumble and bumble through a very long-winded recitation of their CV. And that's really not what you should be doing in response to that question. And so this 60-second life story is designed to make sure that they have some kind of story that illustrates how they're hardworking or how they're creative or how they're a problem solver. It's not enough to just tell people you are. You have to show people that you are. So I would say the minute-long, 45-second-long video is probably the best way to engage people now. But it's also not just the format, Oliver. I think it's also the style in which we communicate. You could have a short video, but if you don't speak in short, choppy thoughts, you could also lose your audience. People tend to speak in long, flowing, prosy style with run-on sentences, and that's not a great way to keep people's attention. You have to have shorter, simpler ideas, smaller helpings.
Yes. Often, how do we speak in quotes? And often think about compression first, make it really succinct. Then about often contrast helps. It's not this, it's that. Not overdoing this, but this can help. Contrast is easy for the brain to process. And finally, cadence, right? Does it rhyme? Is there rhythm? Is there rule of three? Is there any music melody to my sentences? Because at the end of the day, if my sentences stick, if the core idea can be packaged in a way that people will remember it, then I reach my objective of speaking memorably.
Well, think about music. If you tuned a piano where all the notes sounded the same, there would be no recall that you'd have of that sound. And I find there are 3 qualities to the voice that should always be kept in a state of variance. Think of them as the 3 Ps: your pace, your pitch, and your projection. And most people speak in a very narrow range of speed. And what I try to do is get them to broaden that range. So they are speaking at times briskly, and they're also at times downshifting, speaking in a more emphatic and deliberate way. And the rule of thumb is that the longer or the more important the thought is, the more of a key idea this is you're trying to communicate to people, the slower I want you going, the more I want you pausing, perhaps even in the middle of a sentence. And then on the conversational connective tissue that just communicates and connects one key idea to another, then you can step on the gas and be nice and brisk and conversational. But don't ever blow through the big idea.
Absolutely. What about projection?
Most people think that the only way to drive home your point is to hit it harder and hit it louder, and sometimes pulling back and making the audience listen to you more closely. You want to keep up the intensity of your voice, but it's a counterintuitive way of bolding and underlining a big idea if you pull back and you say it at a lower volume.
So quiet conviction.
That's right.
Amazing. Energy is also important and infectious, right? You know, I can have great cadence, but if the energy is lacking, you know, it's hard to reach people, in my view.
You have to lead by example. If you're up there on stage and you don't look enthused with your own content and your own ideas, the audience is not going to follow you. You have to will them to find this interesting. And I find that people are understandably nervous when they have to get up and speak. And they are defining success, unfortunately, as the absence of mistakes. Let me just get through this technically clean. I don't want to have any hiccups or any stumbles. And when you make that your definition of success, you flatten out. You play not to lose. And I often tell people, I couldn't care less if you have a hiccup or two. I'd much rather have that with you putting your back into it and really showing me, I find this stuff interesting. This is important to know. These next 10 minutes I'm speaking to you will be some of the most valuable 10 minutes of your day. You have to exude that out of every pore of your body. And no one's going to remember a little slip here and there if you bring that kind of enthusiasm to it.
That's right. And when we plan presentation or talks, I'm sure you do the same. One of the first questions I ask is, what's your objective? Because if the objective is to excite the organization about this new project or the new path you're taking or the change you want to implement, then you have to project that excitement. Otherwise, no one else will be excited. It feels very obvious when you say it, but in reality, often that thought hadn't occurred.
And yes, and it's not enough to just say 5 times within the first 2 sentences how excited you are. That's probably the most overused word in corporate. I'm so excited to be here. It's such an exciting time for our company. I think we have some very exciting initiatives. And usually people say it with an absolute deadpan, flat demeanor, which doesn't help with authenticity very much.
Yeah. So how do you bring the energy? I mean, it's easy to say for us, just be more energetic. But do you have any tips you can give to speakers, leaders out there who want to be more energetic, but not quite sure how to access that?
You have to find a sense of awe and wonder in your own content. And if you're a leader, you have to be able to verbalize how good you think the outcome is going to be if a particular strategy or initiative is followed. You know, you're trying to lead people and you want to give them the impression, I've seen over the mountaintop, I've seen how good this could turn out for us if we do A, B, and C. And with your voice, you have to reflect that optimism. Let the pitch of your voice rise when you talk about the prospects and the possibilities of what lie ahead if we execute on this. Your voice has a lot to do with conveying that sense of optimism. You know, and in some respects, this may be a fake it till you make it proposition. As you said, not everybody has that kind of ability to emote. It's a muscle that you have to work. It's not enough to just go out and say the words that are in your notes. You have to live them. You have to urge your audience to see the value of what you're saying. And I often try to work with executives to psych them up into realizing you may know this stuff backwards and forwards, but the audience does not. They're perhaps hearing this for the first time. You have to deliver it with the same energy and enthusiasm you may have had when you first had this idea. The reason why stage actors are so incredibly talented is they may be on their 700th performance of a play. They still deliver it with the same gusto they did on opening night. And that's very hard to do. With each subsequent delivery of a message, you will slightly flatten out a little bit, and you have to absolutely fight that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that executives are also quite good at self-correcting. They probably think that they're coming across as energetic, but when you record them and show them the recording, they often notice how bloodless, how lifeless it comes across, especially if they're in a big setting or a virtual call with 20 other people where there's a lot of, energy filters obviously in play, like the camera, the microphone, the stage, etc., etc. So do you have the same experience that recording yourself and then self-correcting is a good path?
This thing is the greatest rehearsal tool on the planet, and most people do not utilize it. And when I record people in training sessions, when I work with executives, the overwhelming reaction that they have is when they look at the video, wow, I look kind of bored. That's inevitably what they all say. And it's because we've come to expect somebody coming through that monitor as being dynamic and showing enthusiasm for the content. So there's a total disconnect. When I'm coaching people, I tell them what feels a little over the top for you is probably just about right. And that's what you have to get used to.
Yeah, exactly. Readjust your energy barometer, right? So
yeah,
the
exactly.
top feels normal. Absolutely. 90% of presentations are forgotten within a day, and even the best ideas get ignored. Over the last 20 years, I've helped hundreds of leaders prepare for stages like TED and South by Southwest, and the difference is always the same. Top 1% communicators, they use a system, and this system is called the Perfect Presentation Planner. Download it now, it's free, link in the description. What about the jargon or the cliches that we often come across, right? The low-hanging fruit and, let's workshop this.
Everybody's on a journey.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Great metaphor. Yeah. In some instances.
Let's unpack that.
Yes, exactly. How can we reduce this and replace it by better expressions, more emotive language?
Awareness is the first step, of course, with breaking any habit. But we often have to sit through other people's presentations, and it's sometimes a good experience. Oftentimes it's not a great experience. And I advise people to just open their notebook or open their digital device and create 2 columns on the page. The left column should be cliched, and the right column new and distinctive. And when the person presenting in front of you says something that you've heard a million times, we have a lot of runway ahead of us. We have a right to win.
Sort of sprint
throughout the entire ecosystem. Yeah, whenever you hear any of those, write them down in the left column and then avoid them at all costs. Make sure that that never comes out of your mouth. Unless you want to sound like one of the birds on the wire, and then, of course, it's perfectly fine to use cliches. But the reason why I don't want people to use them is because it just makes you sound like everybody else. And there are a lot of people out there who don't have the goods. They don't have the knowledge or the skills, and they lean into these expressions to create the illusion that they're somebody of substance. So why would you imitate somebody who doesn't have your capabilities? And then in the right column, if they say something that feels fresh and different and it sparked your attention, jot that down. We're all borrowing from each other all the time. If the person standing in front of the room reflects your personality and you could see making what they said work for you, road test it the next time you have to get up.
That's right. And often you can just twist a cliche a little bit, right? Oh, it's the elephant in the room. It's the elephant in the boardroom, right? So
right.
Give it a little twist.
Exactly.
And then it becomes fresh.
Yeah. So there's a chapter in Speak Memorably called The Magnificent Seven. And it doesn't refer to the tech companies. It refers to 7 verbal devices that any executive can employ to turn very bland, run-of-the-mill, ordinary messaging into something memorable. And one of those 7, which is just something you alluded to, Oliver, is a twisted cliche. This is not an all hands on deck a moment. It's an all brains on deck moment. Taking something making a slight change in something that's overused captures people's attention.
Absolutely, absolutely. What are the other 6? The magnificent ones?
Yeah, well, another one is using an analogy or a metaphor. Jamie Dimon had one the other day when he was talking about a bank failure. I think he said, well, when you see one cockroach, that usually means there are a lot more. There's something that we call a creative label, which is an expression you coin. So the Great Resignation was a creative label. Quiet quitting is a creative label. Years ago, when the founders of Google were asked, so what's your criteria for investing in or acquiring another company? Instead of getting into this wonky list of metrics like ARR and TAM and all that nonsense, they said, well, it's got to be a product or service used twice a day, every day. It's got to pass the toothbrush test. The toothbrush test became this thing that everybody recognized. And so coining something like that is really powerful.
Yeah. Nice. These are brilliant. Yeah, I love the toothbrush test. I hadn't heard that one, but it makes intuitive sense, right? And that's the power of metaphor and analogy. We're connecting something that we know and understand to something we don't yet know and understand, maybe a little complex. And that's the power of it, right?
Yes, incredibly powerful.
What about appearances? The arms, the hands, for instance?
It's interesting. I'm often asked that the most. So what do I do with my hands? I don't know what I'm supposed to do with them. And there are 7 places you shouldn't have your hands. I'm not sure if you're going to remember them all, but never behind your back, never folded across your chest, never in your pockets, never on your hips, never in a fig leaf position, and also never dangled just at your sides. I've never seen anybody standing on stage looking comfortable just with their arms at their sides. And I often tell them, take your forearm and your upper arm and create just a right angle. So if I were to just, let's see if I can do this here. I just want to make sure I'm visible. So it'd be right about here, just above your belt buckle, not clenched or shaped in any way.
It doesn't. It looks like you're really feeling the pressure and you're not confident in your message, right? And that's certainly what we want to avoid. I think this is the case with a lot of what you just described, the gestures to avoid. It's because it doesn't look secure, it doesn't look confident. And as we know, energy spreads. So if I don't project the energy, if I come across as insecure or not really competent in command of my message, then of course that will reflect on the message itself, not just, you can't really disconnect the body from the message, right?
Right. You don't want this to become a distraction. If my hands now become a metronome for how I'm punctuating my words, that now I, as a member of the audience, start timing the intervals of your movements and I stop listening to you.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. This is so good, Bill. Let's bring it all together. I listened to everything you said. Makes a lot of sense. Now I want to speak memorably. So let's say I'm crafting a talk for next week. How do I start and make sure it is actually memorable?
I would go back into that anecdote vault that you've created in your Moleskine or your digital device and see if you can pick that story that you begin with. If you know that you have a talk coming up in a couple of weeks, maybe you intensify being on the lookout for that story that you can start with. I would also make sure that you weave the story through the whole presentation or speech. It's not enough to just lead with it and then drop it. See if you can at least allude to it in passing somewhere in the middle, and then also somehow reference it at the end when you're wrapping up. But I find that one really great strategy for helping people sound casual and conversational instead of scripted and stilted is to not sit down at your computer and write this presentation. Don't write out the presenter's notes or speech. You'd be better off making yourself an outline on your phone or just big index cards, and then take your phone, and there are lots of apps that will not only record your video, but transcribe what you say. Then take the transcript and export that to a Word document or whatever you work from. Clean up the mistakes, but stylistically don't change it. Likely what you're going to come away with are shorter, choppier thoughts, and you're never going to be at odds with that content because it reflects how instinctively you meant to say it. And it'll make it much easier for you to commit that to memory.
Yeah. But what happens is often the opposite, right? It's been written down, then it's written language. At some point, people notice it's written language, not spoken language. Then it goes through all these edits. It just takes a lot of time when you end up in a place that you could have, started with and could have skipped all these other steps. And then people spend too much time and often never gets as sharp as it could have been if you have just recorded yourself. Bill, where can find out people more about you, about the book?
So Speak Memorably is the name of the book. And my firm that I started 25 years ago, coaching everybody from Kim Kardashian to the Cookie Monster. How's that for an eclectic client list? Is called Clarity Media Group. And we are based in New York, but we service London and Hong Kong and the Middle East. So
I now have to ask, please tell me the Kardashian and the Cookie Monster story.
Well, Kim Kardashian was going to sit down and do an interview with Steve Forbes at the Forbes Most Influential Women's Summit. And she just wanted to prep for that fireside chat with Steve Forbes. And because she was starting a business, which turned out to be Skims, which is wildly successful now. And at the end of the interview, or at the end of our session, she said, I think this is something my whole family could really use. I said, well, you've never been media trained before? And she said, no, never. We're just kind of self-taught. And so I sat down with her mother and all her sisters, and they 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after the session said, hey, listen, would you mind if we actually did this as an episode of our show? So the entire media training of the Kardashians is an episode of their old show, Keeping Up with the Kardashians. And then, of course, the Cookie Monster has to go out every year that Sesame Street has a new season of shows. And they want to make sure that all those puppets know how to create interest in the new season of Sesame Street. And so I role play with the puppeteer who works Cookie Monster. And it's actually a fascinating thing because I have to sit on the floor with him underneath a table because obviously the puppet is above the table and interview him while we're sitting on the floor and his arms in the air working Cookie Monster.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing. What an elusive client list. Amazing. This is always my final question, Bill. What's your best piece of communications advice?
I would say that speech to text instead of text to speech is what makes the biggest difference for people. But I would also tell people with so much virtual communication today, I would say if you're on a Zoom call or a Teams call, don't get distracted by trying to read the Zoom. You can read a room, but you can't read a Zoom. Try not to base your confidence in this meeting on whether the people on the call look engaged, because on virtual, they don't. And I found that I kept looking over at the people on the call, trying to get that affirmation that I was being interesting, I was being engaging. And all it was doing was distracting me from the task at hand. And that was presenting the ideas that I had to present. So I closed all the video windows, basically treated them like the old style conference call. And I found my concentration on what I was doing, the task at hand, was much, much better.
So good. I agree. We speak into the void and we love to get something back, but often it's just not there. And that's the medium, not the messenger. So I appreciate you saying that loud and clear. I hadn't heard in that clarity before. Bill, amazing. Thank you so much. Appreciate everything you're doing. Check out the book. Speak Memorably is one of my top picks of last year. Number one in public speaking. I think it's the best public speaking book that came out last year. So check it out. Bill, thank you.
Oliver, it was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the Speak Like a CEO channel. It means the world to me and it helps us keep bringing you world-class insights and guests.